Hello, pleasure to be here. Share with you results of the research we have been working on since 2020 with a brilliant team of students from PUC Rio and IAUSP and collaborators. First of all, we want to express our deep gratitude to Jamie, with whom we have had the pleasure of working in the past few months in a challenging project, South Designs, coordinated also by Laura Kemmer, where we have been exploring floating grounds and somehow building bridges and planting seeds together across the planet. We also thank Séverine Marguin and Vivien Sommer from the opportunity to present our work and interact with Lilian Carr and Alder Kellerman Saxena from the Federal Atlas team, which was certainly one of our references.
So, since we are in a digital space, before anything else, let's land together here now. So, if possible, take off your shoes, or at least place your both feet firmly on the ground and take 3 deep breaths. While doing so, try to acknowledge what's beneath you, what supports your body, the body of the chair you're sitting in, the body of the building where you are. Just acknowledge the heaviness of your own body in the presence of something firmly supporting you, beneath the chair, beneath the pavements. Doesn't matter how you call it. Just feel your body supported by another body that connects us all and breathes also, just like us. Now surrender. Surrender yourself to it. No resistance. Just surrender. Softly, gently, lands, lands, lands. Welcome to the Ground Atlas.
Ground Atlas is an academic project conceived as a counter-cartographic historiographical experiment, aligned with decolonizing sociospatial environmental works that aim to map toxic legacies of colonialism and planetary urbanization. This means that, like many other people in the contemporary artistic, philosophical, anthropological scene, we are looking very critically at conventional objective mapping methods and world models, and asking ourselves with Bruno Latour where to land in such a critical moment. This is why we have conceived Ground Atlas as a critical mapping, a constellar images system that allows one to visualize and navigate through the territorial and spatial dynamics of the world in a critical way to meet the challenges of an urbanizing world where colonialism is still a dominant force.
In doing so, we assume the ambition of mapping the ground of the world in its multiple dimensions and meanings. Our aim is to map and make critically visible processes of urbanization, territorialization, and deterritorialization that remain somehow inscribed in the ground today in different historical, cultural, and geopolitical contexts, not necessarily produced today, but somehow readable today as footprints left by human action and non-human action over time. The idea is to counter land dispossessions that are rooted in all forms of settler colonialism, uncontrolled urbanization, extensive paving, predatory extraction, agribusiness, deforestation, and so on, in order to speculate about other possible territorial configurations, in order to shift perspectives and inspire new ideas, projects, and thoughts, ways of activating and honoring the ground despite its appropriation as a commodity. To look at the body we walk on daily, on which we build our houses, where we bury our dead, the living being made of continuous interactions between multiple species that sustains the livelihoods and the ability of the planet, or the terrestrial system we all inhabit. So when we say ground, we have in mind, of course, its polysemous dimension that refers also to soil, earth, land, territory, but resists to pre-established categories, scientific definitions and discourses, as well as to any reactionary move back to all kinds of blood and soil political claim. Actually, ground for us is such a loose word, so spread, that we are forced to let go of scientific limits and dive into its boundlessness as a polysemous word that refers to a common experience in inhabiting the planet and can be a powerful tool to raise awareness to our relationship with it, as well as to open up our imagination and reshape our political and planetary mindsets. In this sense, the Ground Atlas followed the crucial challenge of shifting from an anthropocentric to a ground-centered cosmology.
Creating an atlas means to us creating both a collection of maps and an image system that allows one to visualize the world and navigate through it. Not the heavy, spherical world that the Titan carries on in his back, but the one we carry in ourselves in the metaphorical impulse we call life. The atlas, therefore, is unfinished by nature. It is dynamic, tentacular, symbiotic. More than the points themselves, what matters to us are the relationships, proximities and distances, intervals, contacts, constellations. Linking isolated points, generating rhizomatic structures that bring about new meanings to them, articulating things that are geographically and culturally distant, creating affinity, relationships that are always ready to be reconfigured. Provisional and sometimes surprising arrangements that offer new reading possibilities as we move around plotting routes. An infiniting atlas with a fictional dimension that corresponds to the crazy ambition of mapping the planet from the ground in its multiple dimensions and meanings.
So in common, the desire to make critically visible actions and practices that involve caring for the ground, to speculate about other possible territorial configurations, to inspire new ideas, projects and thoughts, ways of activating and honoring the ground despite its appropriation as a commodity, to restore its full potential as a living being made of the continuous interaction between multiple species, as a world in which countless times organisms, agents, forces, and logics, domain and power intersect, and as a word archive in which all actions, anthropic and non-anthropic, are somehow inscribed and leave traces. So the basic components of the atlas are its points and constellations. Each point is composed of a hybrid and multiple components, a very precise geolocation, a text that critically inscribes it in the context of historical disputes, a set of iconographic references and tags or layers. Each point thus has a position, but is always escaping from it. It is rather conceived as a critical node, an anchor for drawing constellations that render visible ever-ending relationships and narratives and cannot be detached from the one who sees it. While the layers compose strata from which the points are associated by similarities, the constellations are rhizomes which perform transversalities of meanings.
Ground atlas is therefore not a mapping method, since here all mapping modes and methods are possible. But the atlas explores some methodological issues concerned to critical cartographies by enunciating and revealing alternative meanings to the dominant ones in relation to historical place and events. Image atlas by sustaining thinking through images as a way of producing meanings and affections. Constellations of points by co-producing knowledge, assuming the provisional, simultaneity and emergence as qualities. Curatorship by creating an archive that is at the same time cohesive and open to new insertions proposed by researchers, guests, workshop participants, and to some extent, also by the general public. In terms of the theoretical perspective, we are very much inspired by Aby Warburg and George D. Huberman in terms of building a visual atlas where images are never taken singularly but as a group. Walter Benjamin in terms of giving up historic security and working with displacements, fragmentary constellar writings, and Deleuze and Guattari in terms of rhizomes. Essential concept is that of montage, assembly, that is to say, a discontinuous, non-linear, non-chronological, and ready to be dismantled modus operandi that explores sacred ties between things that are images, documents, events, traces, fragments, opening up new forms of knowledge in contrast to monolithic narratives and conventional representative maps, according to a long tradition that represents the world as a surface seen from above. In short, our attempt is to produce knowledge by assembly.
And this is precisely because for us, ground is not a surface. It has thickness. It has many layers, geological, historical, symbolical layers. And since we are working in a context of accelerating urbanization, when the notion of city, for instance, is not geographical anymore, the challenge is how to map a flow, a process, not a site, not a standing point. Sources are hybrid. Photos taken by the cartographers, for instance, coexist with images and films captured from the internet, as well as with sketches, audios, and Google Maps, descriptive, factual, and fictional texts written especially for the atlas coexist with texts extracted from other sources. And the lack of a vertical dimension that would somehow correspond to a topographical body is thus overcome by a hybrid kind of mapping that collects and articulates multiple layers, sources, procedures, materials, categories, and temporalities into vanishing points. We have so far 224 points in 4 constellations. And these constellations are called Common Ground, Places of Memory of Slavery, the Independent Constellation, and the Planetary Health, which started in another seminar led by Laura Kemmer at Humboldt University last July, and is, so to speak, landing. The most ambitious constellation is the Independent Constellation. It's made of 200 points that evoke and challenge the Brazilian independence process and its contemporary developments from the standpoints of its historical and current relationship with the body of the ground. 200 critical points located not only in Brazil, but also in several other parts of the planet. points which configure multiple nexuses of meaning, not by chronological alignments, but by associations and montages in time and space. Points excavated in impermanences and independencies written by histories and drawn by geographies. Points linked to a long and tragic history of disputes and conflicts over lands in Brazil and other countries. 200 points whose selection combines bibliographic, cartographic, and empirical field research by travels and interviews. So we have a constellation built together by an inter and transdisciplinary team of more than 60 people, including architects, geographers, social scientists, indigenous activists, anthropologists, visual artists, writers, among others, from a sociospatial position marked by the colonial territorial logic and from an unprecedented crossroads where the inequalities inherited from colonial violence are expressed as never before in the substrata on which we step daily.
Rather than celebrating the bicentennial of the independence of Brazil through the reaffirmation of emblematic myths and monuments, it is a matter thus of mapping points in different temporalities, geopolitical and sociocultural contexts that, placed in relation to each other, may contribute to deconstruct and reconstruct narratives, as well as to foster current discussions about colonialism, post-colonialism, and neocolonialism. An assembling map, then, aligned with the colonial perspectives that fight for the historical reparation of silenced people forced to exile and dispersion, ethically and politically committed to the social, environmental, architectural, urban, and political economic crises that we are going through, and to the challenging processes of colonization, modernization, urbanization, territorialization, and deterritorialization, deeply rooted in what we now call Brazil.
So if we navigate through some of those 200 points, what will we find? The remains of what's believed to be the busiest slavery port in the world, built in the 19th century in Rio de Janeiro, and recently declared a United Nations heritage site, for example, or footprints on the ground that document the ancestry of indigenous presence in a vast area in central Brazil, despite successive erasure policies implemented by the Brazilian state, especially during the military dictatorship, as shown by Paulo Tavares, whose exhibition with Gabriela Matos is this one, The Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale. We can also see one of the 40,000 gas stations spread across Brazil. Not anyone, but a specific one whose name and logo directly allude to an indigenous land threatened and intoxicated by this and many, many other technical infrastructures. Or an umpire's heart, a dead organ that crossed the ocean, loaned to Brazil from Portugal for a couple of days to become the ultimate symbol both of the celebrations of the bicentennial of independence and the necropolitics of Bolsonaro government. Important to say that all these 200 points, as all points mapped in the atlas, are ready to be reconfigured in new constellations. And actually, anyone can do so as a footprint using the Pegada button.
Pegada, or footprint, is conceived as an invitation and challenge to anyone that enters that atlas, that is, draw constellations. Implies First of all, choosing a theme, a topic, then looking for points that could turn this critically visible. One must accept the risk of getting lost. Tests are in English. They are marked with E and N. We have already 19 points. Then you can use the engine Busca, or here, this is Busca, search. But you can also use the Google Translator. Anyone that then registered a constellation by giving it a name, here you can put your name, email, the title of the constellation, your name as author or a group of authors, where you are located, an abstract, a description of this constellation, and some links, images, videos, and so on. And for these, your abstract needs to have from 10 to 140 characters, and a description that could be up to 1,000 characters. Basically, you must follow 3 steps: definition of a topic, selection of points, and registration. Note that constellations must be altered by someone or a collective, by registering one email and so on, as I told before. You may try it afterwards and build your own constellations. While doing so, once again, try to acknowledge what is beneath you, what supports you, the body of your chair you are sitting in, the body of the building where you are. Doesn't matter how to call it, just feel your body supported by another body that connects us all and breathes just like us. Then softly, gently land. Ground yourself in the atlas and navigate through it, creating words. Danke, obrigado, agiu vegete, that is gratitude in Tupi Guarani.